Jackson stood in the dimly lit kitchen of a remote house, his grease-streaked hands gripping the edge of the counter. Across from him, Emily, the poised and elegant wife of Lucas, the wealthy ranch owner, leaned in, her voice sharp and controlled. "This isn't just about revenge," Emily whispered, her green eyes blazing with anger. "This is about teaching Lucas that he can't treat me like some trophy." Jackson's jaw tightened. "You're playing a dangerous game, Emily. If he finds out—" "He won't," Emily interrupted, her voice icy. She slid a piece of paper across the counter. It was a detailed plan, complete with dates, contacts, and instructions. "This is how we do it. Step by step." Jackson glanced at the paper, his gut twisting. The plan was meticulous, cruel even. It outlined a series of events designed to publicly humiliate Lucas, tarnish his reputation, and strip him of the ranch's respect. It was a lot for a mechanic to digest, but Jackson had his reasons for being here. Lucas had crossed him 2 years ago, and Emily's scheme offered the perfect outlet for his buried resentment. "I'm not sure about this," Jackson said, though his hesitation was more about the escalating stakes than morality. Emily leaned in closer, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. "You've got your reasons, Jackson. Don't pretend you don't want to see him brought to his knees." The memory of Lucas's condescending smirk flashed in Jackson's mind. The man had treated him like dirt, questioning his skills, refusing payment on jobs, and spreading rumors that almost cost him his livelihood. Jackson's fists clenched. "All right," he said, his voice heavy with resolve. "But this better work." The first phase of Emily's plan unfolded at the annual Ranchers Gala, a gathering of influential figures in the industry. Emily had planned every detail meticulously. She had Jackson tamper with Lucas's prized vintage truck, ensuring it would break down spectacularly in front of the crowd. The moment came when Lucas, ever the showman, offered to take one of the ranching magnates for a ride. As the truck sputtered and emitted a loud bang, the crowd burst into laughter. Lucas's face turned beet red. Emily, standing elegantly by the refreshment table, hid her smirk behind a sip of champagne. "Phase 1, she murmured to herself, satisfied. A week later, Jackson found himself in the barn, installing a hidden camera at Emily's behest. "What's this for?" he asked, though he already had a sinking suspicion. "Let's just say Lucas isn't as faithful as he pretends to be," Emily replied cryptically. It didn't take long for the camera to capture damning footage of Lucas meeting a woman who wasn't his wife in the same barn. Emily wasted no time sharing the footage with a carefully selected group of people, ensuring it would circulate within their social circle. The scandal spread like wildfire, tarnishing Lucas's reputation further. But the moves didn't end there. Emily began planting rumors about Lucas's financial stability. She had Jackson forge documents suggesting that Lucas had taken out massive loans to keep the ranch afloat. Within days, creditors, real and imagined, started showing up, demanding payment. Jackson couldn't help but marvel at Emily's cold precision. Yet, there was a part of him that wondered if they'd gone too far. One night, as Jackson worked late in his garage, he heard the sound of tires crunching on gravel. He looked up to see Lucas stepping out of a sleek black car. The ranch owner's face was a mask of restrained fury. "I know you've been talking to Emily," Lucas said, his voice low but dangerous. Jackson's heart pounded. "I don't know what you're talking about." Lucas stepped closer, the overhead light casting harsh shadows across his face. "You think I don't know when someone's scheming against me? You're not smart enough to pull this off on your own. So let me make this clear. Stay out of my business, or you'll regret it." Jackson swallowed hard as Lucas stormed out, his parting words echoing in the quiet night. For the first time, Jackson felt a chill of doubt about the path he had chosen. The final blow came during the ranch's annual livestock auction. Emily had arranged for a rival rancher to outbid Lucas on every prized animal. Jackson, posing as a buyer, added to the pressure, driving up prices to exorbitant levels. By the end of the night, Lucas had lost most of his best livestock and was left humiliated in front of his peers. But the victory felt hollow to Jackson. Watching Lucas's defeated expression as he left the auction, Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that he had become complicit in something darker than he had bargained for. Back at the remote house, Emily celebrated with champagne. "We did it," she said, raising her glass. Jackson didn't respond. He stared out the window, the weight of their actions pressing down on him. "What now?" he asked finally. Emily's smile faltered for a moment, but then she shrugged. "We move on. Lucas will survive, but he'll never forget this." Jackson nodded, though the answer didn't satisfy him. As he left the house that night, he couldn't help but wonder if he had just traded one set of regrets for another. The first shot shattered the tense silence like a thunderclap. I froze mid-sentence, Emily's face twisting in shock as the echo of the gunshot rolled off into the night. The mirror of her sleek black car exploded in a spray of glass, shards tinkling onto the gravel like sinister rain. My heart slammed against my ribs, and I instinctively dropped into a crouch. "What the hell was that?" I hissed, glancing toward the shadows surrounding the remote house. Emily wasn't as quick to react. She stood there, her face pale, her eyes darting toward the source of the shot. Another gunshot rang out, this one taking out the headlight of the car. The sudden burst of light made the darkness feel even more oppressive. "Get down," I barked, grabbing her wrist and yanking her behind the cover of the car. My pulse roared in my ears as I scanned the area, trying to pinpoint where the shots had come from. Emily pressed against the side of the car, her breath coming in sharp gasps. Who is it? Is it Lucas? Did he find out?" I didn't answer. I didn't know. Whoever it was, they were serious. I peeked around the corner of the car, but the night swallowed everything beyond a few feet. The third shot ricocheted off the hood, sparking like fireflies in the dark. Emily let out a small scream and clapped her hands over her mouth. "We have to move," I said, keeping my voice low. "If they're aiming to kill, they're going to aim for us next. How do we get out of here?" Emily whispered, her voice trembling. I tried to think through the chaos. We couldn't stay there, pinned down like sitting ducks. But running blindly into the darkness wasn't much better. Still, I knew one thing, staying meant getting shot. "There's a back gate on the ranch," I said. "If we can get to it, we can use the woods for cover." "You're going to have to trust me." Emily hesitated, her fear plain in the way her hands trembled. "Jackson, if we die out here..." "We won't," I snapped, more sharply than I intended. "Stay low and follow me." No. I didn't wait for her to argue. I crawled toward the edge of the car, keeping my head down. Another shot rang out, hitting the ground a few feet from me. Dirt and gravel sprayed my face, but I kept moving. Adrenaline turned my panic into grim determination. Emily followed, her movements jerky and clumsy. I wanted to yell at her to keep it together, but there wasn't time. The shooter was getting closer. I could hear the crunch of boots on gravel, slow and deliberate. "Run on 3, I said as we reached the edge of the driveway. "Straight for the gate. Don't stop." She nodded, her teeth chattering. I counted softly, 1, 2. The next shot whizzed past us, and I didn't wait for 3. "Go." We bolted into the open, the cold night air biting at our skin. The ranch gate loomed ahead, a faint outline in the darkness. My legs burned as I pushed myself to run faster, Emily just behind me. Shots followed, each one making my chest tighten, but none hit their mark. The gate was padlocked, but I knew the code. My fingers fumbled with the combination, sweat making the numbers slippery. Emily pressed against me, her panic rising as the footsteps grew louder. "Hurry," she begged, her voice high and strained. "I'm trying." I snapped, forcing my hands to steady. The lock clicked open, and I shoved the gate wide. "Go." Emily darted through, and I followed, slamming the gate shut behind us. I jammed the lock back into place and spun the numbers at random, buying us precious seconds. We sprinted into the woods, the trees swallowing us in their thick, shadowy embrace. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs felt like lead. The gunfire had stopped, but neither of us dared to slow down. Finally, when we couldn't run any further, we collapsed behind a fallen tree, gasping for breath. Did we lose them? Emily wheezed, clutching at her side. I listened, my ears straining for any sound of pursuit. The woods were silent except for the rustling of leaves and our ragged breathing. "I think so," I said, though I wasn't sure. Emily turned to me, her face pale and streaked with sweat. "Who was it, Jackson? Was it Lucas? Or someone else?" I shook my head, my mind racing. I don't know. But whoever it was, they weren't just trying to scare us. Emily hugged her knees, her composure cracking. This is all my fault, she whispered. I dragged you into this mess. Hey, I said, my voice softening. You didn't fire the shots. Whoever's out there, this is on them, not you. She didn't look convinced, but I didn't have the energy to argue. We needed to figure out our next move, and fast. Whoever the shooter was, they knew where to find us. And if they were willing to shoot up her car, they wouldn't stop there. I glanced at Emily, her shoulders hunched and her face buried in her hands. For all her confidence and cunning, she looked vulnerable now, stripped bare by the night's events. I felt a flicker of guilt. She had roped me into her schemes, but I had chosen to stay. Whatever happened next, we were in this together. We'll figure it out, I said, more for her sake than mine. But first, we need to get somewhere safe. Emily nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. For the first time, she didn't argue or snap back. She just followed me into the dark woods, her trust fragile but real. And as we stumbled onward, every rustle and shadow feeling like the next attack, one thought kept gnawing at me. The shooter knew who we were. But we had no idea who they were, or what they wanted. The morning after the shooting was surreal. My body ached from the mad sprint through the woods, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. Emily and I huddled in the drafty confines of an old tool shed deep in the woods, our makeshift refuge. The shooter was still out there, and now we had another problem: how to explain why we'd been at the ranch so late. The truth wasn't an option. We need a story, Emily said, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. She was sitting on an overturned crate, her arms wrapped around herself as though trying to stave off the chill in the air. Something plausible? I leaned against the wall, staring at the sunlight streaming through the gaps in the wooden planks. Plausible, huh? I said, unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice. You think anything's gonna sound believable after what went down last night? Emily shot me a look, her green eyes sharper than broken glass. Do you have a better idea, Jackson? Or do you want to sit here and wait for the sheriff to haul us in? I sighed, rubbing my face with my hands. She wasn't wrong. Sheriff Grant didn't take kindly to people snooping around ranch property without a damn good reason, and the gunshots weren't going to help our case. We'll say we were looking for something, I said finally. Papers, maybe, something Lucas might have left behind when he cleaned out the place. Emily tilted her head, considering. Forgotten documents, she murmured. Something he wouldn't miss right away. It's weak, but it might work. It's better than nothing, I said. But you better hope Grant doesn't dig too deep. That man's like a bloodhound when he smells a lie. By the time we made it back to the ranch, the sun was high in the sky, washing the grounds in an unforgiving light. Emily's car sat in the driveway, its shattered mirror and busted headlight glaringly obvious. The sight made my stomach churn. It was a reminder of how close we'd come to real danger. As if on cue, Sheriff Grant's cruiser pulled up, kicking up a plume of dust. The man himself stepped out, his tall, wiry frame casting a long shadow. His hat sat low on his head, and his sharp eyes immediately zeroed in on the damaged car. Well, this is a sight, he drawled, sauntering over. You two want to tell me what's going on? Emily stepped forward, her composure as perfect as ever. Sheriff, she said smoothly, thank goodness you're here. We had a bit of a scare last night. Grant raised an eyebrow. The scare, huh? Care to elaborate? Emily hesitated and I jumped in, trying to sound casual. We were out here looking for some old documents Lucas might have left behind. Something Emily thought he'd stored in the house. Documents? Grant repeated, his tone skeptical. At this hour? Emily gave a nervous laugh, brushing her hair back. I know it sounds odd, but I remembered them suddenly and thought it was important to check. It's complicated. Grant didn't look convinced. He crouched down to examine the bullet hole in the car's hood. Complicated, sure, he muttered. You didn't think to call anyone when the shooting started? We panicked, I said quickly. We didn't know who it was or why they were shooting. We just ran. The sheriff stood, brushing dirt from his hands. His gaze swept over us, lingering a moment too long. You're telling me you didn't recognize the shooter? Emily shook her head. It was too dark. And we didn't exactly stick around to get a good look. Grant crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. You're lucky to be alive, both of you. But your story's got more holes than that car. Lucas keeps this place locked up tight. How'd you get in? We used the side gate, I said, trying to sound matter-of-fact. Emily had the code from when she used to manage the ranch accounts. Grant's eyes narrowed slightly, and I could feel his suspicion deepening. He wasn't the kind of man to let things slide, especially when they didn't add up. But before he could press further, his radio crackled to life. Grant, we've got a call about shots fired over on Maplewood. Need you to check it out? The sheriff lifted the radio to his mouth, his gaze still fixed on us. Copy that, he said. Then, after a long pause, he added, Don't go too far, you hear? I'll be back. We watched him drive off, the tension between us almost palpable. Well, that went great, I muttered, my voice heavy with sarcasm. Emily turned to me, her face tight with frustration. Do you think he believed us? Not for a second, I said. Grant's not dumb. He knows we're hiding something. Over the next few days, the pressure only grew. Grant stopped by the garage where I worked, asking more questions about that night. Each time, I stuck to the story, but I could tell he wasn't buying it. Emily kept up her cool facade, but even she was starting to crack under the scrutiny. Then came the knock on my door late one evening. I opened it to find Grant standing there, holding a folder. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. Mind if I come in? He asked, though it was more a statement than a question. I stepped aside, my stomach twisting in knots. Grant walked in, setting the folder on the table. Found something interesting, he said, opening it. Inside were photos, grainy but clear enough to show two figures running through the woods near the ranch. My blood ran cold. Where'd you get these? Trail cam, Grant said. Lucas had a few set up around the property. Thought you'd know, considering how familiar you seem with the place. I forced myself to stay calm. So what? Those could be anyone. Grant's lips twitched in a faint smile. Maybe. But the timeline matches your little document search. Care to explain why you were running like hell? I opened my mouth, but no words came. Emily had warned me this might happen, but seeing the evidence laid out like this made it all too real. Look, I said finally, we told you everything. We didn't see the shooter, and we ran because we were scared. That's the truth. Grant leaned back in his chair, studying me. You know what I think, Jackson? I think there's more to this. And I think you're protecting someone. I didn't respond, and after a moment, Grant stood, gathering the photos. I'll be in touch, he said, heading for the door. As soon as he was gone, I slumped into a chair, my head in my hands. Emily and I were in deep and the walls were closing in. We needed a new plan, and fast. The buzz of my phone jerked me awake, the vibration rattling against the table next to the couch where I'd passed out. I grabbed it, squinting at the screen. Emily's name lit up in bold letters. We've got a problem, she said without preamble when I answered. Her voice was low but edged with tension. More problems? I muttered, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. What now? Grant started his investigation. He's already been sniffing around the ranch, but that's not the worst of it, she said, her words tumbling out quickly. Lucas knows. That snapped me fully awake. What do you mean, Lucas knows? The cameras, Jackson, Emily said, exasperation bleeding into her voice. The damn surveillance system. Apparently, it was set to back up on a server. Lucas got alerts when the footage was accessed. I swore under my breath, running a hand through my hair. Of course Lucas had backups. The man didn't trust anyone, least of all me. It made sense that he'd want an extra layer of control over his precious ranch. What did he see? Asked my voice tight. I don't know yet, Emily admitted. But he's been calling me nonstop. He left a voicemail saying we need to talk. And not the casual kind of talk. He sounded furious. I exhaled slowly, trying to keep my thoughts straight. Sheriff Grant was one thing. He operated by the book, more or less. Lucas, though? If he thought we were up to something, he'd go for blood. All right, I said. We need to get ahead of this. Where are you? Still at home, she said. But I can meet you at the garage. Make it fast, I said before hanging up. Emily arrived about 20 minutes later, her face pale but composed. She carried a thin folder, which she tossed onto the workbench without a word. Inside were printouts of emails and system logs tied to Lucas's surveillance system. "See for yourself," she said, crossing her arms. "He's been monitoring the ranch even when he's away. That's how he caught the footage of us running through the woods." I sifted through the papers, my mind racing. The logs didn't just show our escape, they also captured parts of our earlier conversation by the car. The audio wasn't great, but it didn't take a detective to piece together that we weren't there for anything innocent. "This is bad," I muttered. "Tell me something I don't know," Emily snapped. "What are we going to do?" "First, calm down," I said, even though my own nerves were fraying. "We need to stick to our story. If Lucas comes at us, we tell him the same thing we told Grant. We were looking for documents." Emily frowned, pacing the length of the garage. "That might hold up with Grant, but Lucas isn't going to buy it. He knows me too well. And what's he going to do?" I shot back. "Call the sheriff himself? That means explaining why he was spying on us in the first place." Emily stopped pacing, her eyes narrowing as she considered this. "You think he'll keep quiet to save his own skin?" "It's a gamble," I admitted. "But it's all we've got." The next day, Sheriff Grant's investigation kicked into high gear. He brought in a small team, scouring the ranch for evidence. They combed through the woods, searched the outbuildings, and even dusted Emily's car for prints. But despite their efforts, they came up empty-handed. "No shell casings," Grant said when he stopped by the garage to give me an update. "No footprints that don't belong to you two. Nothing." I tried to look appropriately baffled. "So what does that mean?" Grant shrugged, his sharp gaze cutting through me. "It means either the shooter was damn good at covering their tracks, or he trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. Or we made it up." I finished for him, my voice flat. "You think we'd go through all this for fun?" "I think there's more to the story than you're telling me," Grant said. "But I'll find out. I always do." He left without another word, and I sank onto a stool, my head in my hands. The man was relentless. I couldn't tell if his persistence was a good thing or a disaster waiting to happen. That evening, Lucas made his move. He showed up at Emily's house, his truck rumbling to a stop in her driveway. I got the call minutes later. "He's here," Emily hissed into the phone. "He's demanding answers." What do I say? "Stick to the story," I said. "And don't let him intimidate you." Easier said than done, I thought grimly. Lucas was a master at intimidation. His sheer presence could cow most people, and when he was angry, he was a force of nature. I stayed on the line as Emily faced him, listening to the muffled sounds of their conversation. Lucas's voice was low and controlled, but I could hear the menace beneath the surface. "You're lying," he said at one point, his tone cold. "You and Jackson think you're clever, but I'm on to you." Emily didn't flinch. "We told you the truth," she said firmly. "If you have proof otherwise, show it." There was a long pause and I held my breath. Finally, Lucas muttered something I couldn't make out, and the sound of his boots retreated. The front door slammed, and Emily let out a shaky sigh. "He's gone," she said. "But he's not buying it." "Doesn't matter," I said. "As long as he doesn't have anything concrete, he can't do anything." "Let's hope you're right," Emily said before hanging up. The next few days were tense but quiet. Grant's investigation stalled, and Lucas seemed to back off, at least publicly. But the uneasy truce didn't feel like a victory. It felt like the calm before the storm. I kept my head down at work, trying to go about my routine as if nothing had happened. But every time a customer walked in or a car pulled up, I half expected to see Grant or Lucas, ready to tear everything apart. Emily, meanwhile, started digging deeper into Lucas's dealings, hoping to find something that could be used as leverage if things went south. It was a risky move, but at this point, we didn't have much choice. "We're walking a tightrope," I told her during one of our late-night meetings. "One slip, and this whole thing comes crashing down." "I know," she said. "But we can't stop now. Not when we're this close." Close to what? I wasn't sure. Survival, maybe. Or something worse. The night of Lucas's birthday party arrived, and I felt like I was walking into a lion's den. Emily had insisted we attend to keep up appearances, but every instinct in my body screamed at me to stay far away. The ranch's main house was bustling with guests, business partners, ranch hands, and neighbors. Laughter and clinking glasses filled the air, but to me, it felt like the countdown to a disaster. Emily stayed glued to my side, her polished smile hiding the tension radiating from her. "Keep calm," she whispered as we entered. "We act normal, no matter what." I nodded, though my stomach churned. Lucas's eyes found us almost immediately. He was in the center of the room, playing the role of a gracious host, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. There was a dangerous gleam there, something sharp and calculating. "Emily." "Jackson," he called out, his voice carrying over the chatter. "Glad you could make it?" The way he said it sent a chill down my spine. Emily stepped forward, returning his smile with one of her own, perfectly practiced and devoid of any warmth. "Happy birthday, Lucas," she said, handing him a small, gift-wrapped box. "We wouldn't miss it." Lucas took the gift but didn't open it. Instead, he gestured for us to follow him toward the center of the room, where a large flat-screen TV had been set up. My heart sank. "I've got a little surprise for everyone," Lucas announced, his voice booming. The room quieted, all eyes turning to him. "Emily and Jackson have been such loyal friends," Lucas continued, his gaze flicking to us. "So I thought I'd share something special." Emily's hand gripped my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "He's going to do it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He's going to show the footage." I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. Lucas picked up a remote and clicked it, and the TV screen lit up. The grainy black and white footage was unmistakable. Emily and I, standing by her car that night, our conversation partially audible. The crowd murmured, confusion giving way to shock as the context became clear. Lucas let the footage play, his face a mask of calm. He didn't even flinch when the audio picked up my voice. "We can't keep doing this. If anyone finds out..." "They won't," Emily's voice replied. "Just stick to the plan." Someone in the crowd gasped. A woman muttered, "What the hell is this?" While others looked between Lucas, Emily, and me, their expressions a mix of outrage and disbelief. Emily stepped forward, her voice steady despite the storm brewing in the room. "Lucas, this is low, even for you." "Low?" Lucas said, tilting his head. "I think it's justice. You think you can scheme against me on my own land and walk away? Not a chance." The room erupted into whispers, people piecing together the implications. I clenched my fists, feeling the weight of every set of eyes boring into me. "This is pathetic, Lucas," Emily said, her voice rising. "You're trying to humiliate us because you can't handle the truth." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "And what truth would that be?" "That you've been lying to everyone here for years," Emily shot back. "How many of your so-called friends here know about the shady deals you've been making? The surveillance? The loans you're drowning in?" The crowd's attention shifted, the whispers turning into a low buzz of uncertainty. Lucas's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond immediately. That gave Emily the opening she needed. "We were looking for evidence, Lucas," she continued, her tone sharp. "Evidence to expose you for what you really are." It was a gamble, a desperate attempt to turn the tables, but it worked. People started murmuring louder, their curiosity piqued. Lucas opened his mouth to respond, but someone from the crowd interrupted. "Is this true, Lucas?" a rancher asked, his voice loud enough to cut through the noise. Lucas hesitated, and that brief pause was all it took for the tide to shift. The guests were no longer focused on Emily and me, they were questioning Lucas, demanding answers. I stepped up beside Emily, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "Lucas set us up," I said. "He's been spying on everyone, using the cameras to control the people around him. This footage? It's just a distraction from the real problem." More voices joined in, accusations and doubts swirling through the room. Lucas's control over the situation was slipping, and he knew it. "This is my house," he bellowed, slamming the remote onto the table. "You think you can come here and turn my own guests against me?" "No, Lucas," Emily said, her voice cutting through his outburst. "You did that yourself." For a moment, the room was silent, the tension thick enough to choke on. Then, one by one, People began leaving, muttering among themselves. The party was over, and Lucas stood there, his fury barely contained, as his carefully constructed facade crumbled around him. Emily and I didn't wait for him to recover. We slipped out the door, our hearts pounding but our heads held high. The storm wasn't over, but for now, we'd weathered it together.